Hi, I'm Natalia. My father slapped me. Yes, slapped me in front of 230 guests at my sister's wedding. He demanded the keys to my apartment, mocking me as a single woman who doesn't need space, as if everything I'd worked for didn't matter. I had paid for it all myself, yet they thought they could take me, without consequence. How could the people who should protect you become the ones trying to erase your life? And in the silence that followed, I realized justice wasn't going to give itself. I had to claim it. I never imagined that attending my sister's wedding would feel like stepping into a battlefield. The sun hung low over Northern California, casting long golden shadows across the suburban wedding venue, and the soft hum of conversation mingled with the distant clink of glasses. I arrived slightly early, clutching the bouquet I had helped pick out, my heels clicking on the polished stone walkway. Excitement bubbled inside me, not just for my sister, but for the pride of having contributed so much to this celebration. Months of planning, countless phone calls, spreadsheets, and even lending money had culminated in this perfect spring afternoon. Yet, beneath the surface of joy, a familiar unease lingered. Family events were never just about celebration. They carried the weight of unspoken rules, grudges, and the subtle calculations of approval. The courtyard was filled with 230 guests, a sea of familiar faces, distant relatives I barely knew, friends of my sister's fiancé, and neighbors who had come for the spectacle. I scanned the crowd, hoping for a smile, a friendly nod, but even as the flowers swayed gently in the breeze, I could sense the tension threading through the air. My mother fluttered near the entrance, adjusting a corsage, her face a mask of anxious excitement. My sister, radiant in her gown, looked serene, oblivious to the undercurrents around her. And then I saw him, my father, standing near the edge, eyes sharp, jaw tight. My stomach sank. I had braced myself for his judgment before, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. "Hand over the apartment keys, Natalia," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient chatter. I froze, heart thundering. My hands, still clutching the bouquet, trembled. The words didn't make sense. This was not a business transaction. This was family, and yet here he was, demanding access to something so personal, so private. What? I stammered, disbelief making my tongue heavy. My mother glanced over, her eyes widening, and I caught a flicker of fear, of recognition that she could not intervene fast enough. Before I could process, his hand struck me across the cheek. The sound, a harsh, sharp smack, echoed through the courtyard. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a wave of stunned silence. Shock froze me in place. My cheek burned, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I straightened my shoulders, forcing my lips into a controlled line. I had always thought of myself as composed, resilient, capable of handling awkward family politics. But standing there, in front of everyone, I realized how quickly humiliation could strip you bare, how exposure magnified every flaw your family had ever judged. My father's eyes, cold and unwavering, held a satisfaction I could not ignore. The mockery was intentional. "You're a single woman who doesn't need space anyway," he continued, his voice carrying across the crowd like a cruel bell. The words stung more than the slap, each syllable a reminder of years of subtle manipulation, of the times I had been undermined quietly, dismissed as someone who couldn't measure up to my sister or her life choices. My sister flinched, but she didn't intervene. The guests shifted uncomfortably, some averting their gaze, others sneaking glances at me with a mix of pity and curiosity. I took a slow, deliberate breath. Letting anger surge too fast would only give him the satisfaction of victory. I felt the familiar coil of resolve tighten inside me, the one that had carried me through years of disappointment, subtle betrayals, and the quiet injustice of being underestimated. I would not be powerless. Not today, not in front of 230 witnesses. Retreating inward, I began to catalog everything I knew about my family's dynamics, about subtle alliances and hidden resentments. Aunt Marlene had always admired my independence, albeit quietly. Cousin Jason had a habit of speaking when he sensed injustice. Even among the chaos, There were threads I could pull to reclaim some dignity. I would not act rashly, but strategically. I allowed my father's gaze to linger, noting the smugness that came from the belief that he had successfully humiliated me. As inside, however, my mind was already spinning through possibilities. What could I do next to protect what was mine? How could I regain control in a space where he had assumed dominance? I remembered the nights I had spent negotiating with landlords, budgeting for my sister's wedding, and balancing a career that demanded intelligence, patience, and intuition. I had faced challenges before. I could do it again, smarter, stronger, more deliberate. I looked at my mother, her face a mixture of worry and helplessness. She would not interfere, not openly. That meant it was up to me to navigate the aftermath, to turn humiliation into leverage, and to ensure that my father's misjudgment of my capabilities would not go unchallenged. The crowd continued to murmur quietly, but I no longer noticed. My vision had narrowed to the internal map I was drawing, the subtle maneuvering that would allow me to reclaim my agency. I stepped back slightly, pretending to adjust my dress, but every movement was calculated, deliberate. I would survive this. I would not let a public slap and a cruel remark define me. And as the golden light of the late afternoon shimmered across the courtyard, I felt the first sparks of a plan taking shape. It would require patience, subtlety, and an unwavering resolve, but I was ready. My sister, laughing with friends nearby, seemed blissfully unaware of the silent war unfolding just steps away. I envied her naivety for a moment, but then I reminded myself that I had strength she had yet to cultivate. That strength, honed over years of navigating family intricacies, would guide me forward. The hum of conversation, the soft clink of glasses, and the gentle rustling of wedding decorations became the soundtrack to my resolve. I straightened my back, smoothed my dress, and allowed a measured smile to play across my lips. Minten Natalia. Chauban. But what would I do next to protect what's mine? I'm Natalia. Still trembling from Dad's slap, but I knew I couldn't just stay silent. The sound of it, the sharp crack of his hand against my cheek, still echoed in my head, mixing with the polite murmurs and clinking of glasses in the reception hall. Guests shuffled their feet, glances flicking between my reddened cheek and my father's stern, unyielding face. Some were frozen, unsure if they should intervene. Others whispered behind hands, sharing silent judgments that I could feel crawling over my skin. I pressed a napkin to my cheek, not just for the sting, but to anchor myself. I needed to breathe, to think, before letting the storm inside me explode. Moving to the side, I let the crowd part slightly, noticing who looked at me with sympathy, who smirked with secret amusement, and who chose to align themselves with Dad's display of authority. Aunt Marge gave me a subtle nod from across the room, a small gesture of support that warmed a corner of my chest. Meanwhile, my sister, radiant in her new satin gown, was all smiles and silent judgment, as if she had orchestrated this entire spectacle. I slid onto a high-backed chair in the corner, the hum of conversation enveloping me like a blanket I couldn't quite shake off. My mind replayed the moment over and over, not to dwell on the shame, but to dissect it. How long had Dad been preparing for this? Every word, every look, every little jibe over the years, they all made sense now. He had been training me to stay small, to let him decide what was right for the family, to keep me from ever claiming my own space. But I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't the young girl who hid her dreams because her father frowned at them. I remembered the mornings I tried to carve a life independent of their control, Dad's lectures about responsibilities and how a woman should behave, Mom's gentle but guilt-laden reminders that family comes first, and my sister's sharp eyes measuring my every move. Those memories stung, but they also steeled me. I wasn't going to vanish into the background today. I needed to make them see, really see, that I was no longer powerless. As the reception music shifted to a softer tune, I observed the small interactions around me. Cousins laughing over inside jokes, the family friend whispering commentary about Dad's outburst, servers passing trays of hors d'oeuvres. Every gesture, every glance became a data point. Who might quietly side with me if I spoke up? Who would gossip and spread my humiliation further? The hall suddenly felt like a chessboard, and I was beginning to understand the positions of each piece. The first opportunity came when Uncle Robert, notorious for his casual jabs, leaned close to my table and said in a tone too loud to be innocent, "Single women like you never change, huh? Still trying to run the world from your little apartment?" The words, meant to sting, bounced off the walls of my anger and determination. I met his gaze directly, my voice calm but firm. "Actually, I'm running my life just fine. Maybe it's time to check if your advice is as helpful as you think." The ripples of surprise were immediate. Several nearby guests turned toward us, whispering. I felt a flicker of pride, a spark that hadn't been there when Dad's hand struck me. I glanced at Dad, whose expression shifted slightly, a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. He leaned back, clearly uncertain how to respond without creating an even bigger scene. My sister's mouth tightened in an almost imperceptible sneer, and I knew she was mentally cataloging my audacity. The corners of my mind raced. This was my first step in reclaiming my voice, and I had to be careful. Every word now had weight, every gesture a statement. The night moved slowly, the sunset outside fading into the dim glow of the reception hall lights. I walked toward the buffet under the guise of getting a drink, but my eyes never stopped scanning. Aunt Marge caught my gaze again, mouthing, "You're doing fine." I nodded slightly. Cousin Ellen offered a small smile, subtle but genuine. These small alliances felt fragile yet essential. I wasn't just standing for myself, I was testing the waters, feeling for cracks in the walls that had kept me contained for decades. Later, Dad approached me again, his posture slightly less imposing. "Natalia," he began, voice low enough for only me to hear. "Remember your place." My response was quiet but firm, the words tasting like iron and resolve. "I remember, Dad." "And my place isn't defined by anyone but me." He didn't reply, and for a moment I felt the satisfaction of the balance subtly shifting, however slightly, in my favor. The evening continued, with laughter and clinking glasses masking the undercurrents of tension. My sister's friends whispered and pointed, some curiously, some with disapproval, but I held my ground, each step and glance calculated. I wasn't just surviving this event anymore, I was asserting myself in it. As guests began to leave, I slipped away to a quiet corner near the hall's rear exit, letting the soft hum of distant chatter settle around me. I leaned against the wall, heart still racing, and allowed a small smile to curl at the edges of my lips. This was only the beginning. I had tested my voice tonight, and the reactions told me I could push further. The journey wasn't over. It was just taking its first deliberate turn. I knew that tonight was just the beginning. What would happen when I stopped holding back? I stepped into the garden patio, letting the cool evening air hit my face, trying to steady the storm inside me. I couldn't let tonight end without reclaiming my dignity. The faint glow of fairy lights stretched across the patio, reflecting off glasses of champagne and the scattered petals of flowers that still clung to the tables. Guests lingered outside, whispering in small clusters, some offering sympathetic glances, others smirking as if silently agreeing with my humiliation. I took a deep breath, recalling every sharp word, every dismissive glance I'd endured over the years. Tonight wasn't just about my sister's wedding. It was about confronting the legacy of my family's constant undermining. For a moment, I let myself feel the sting, but then I pushed it aside. Isolation, I reminded myself, was temporary. Observation was my ally, and strategy my shield. From the corner of my eye, I spotted my father talking quietly to a group of relatives. His tone was calm, but I knew better. He was performing damage control, framing the night in a way that preserved his reputation and dismissed the embarrassment he had caused me. Every nod he gave, every subtle smile was calculated. I clenched my hands, reminding myself that his power only extended as far as I allowed it. Meanwhile, my sister hovered near the edge of the patio, laughing with bridesmaids, her new husband glowing beside her. She seemed oblivious, or perhaps deliberately blind, to the impact of her entitlement. Each laugh, each casual gesture of superiority, fanned the fire building in me. My mind raced, weighing words carefully, considering the precise moment to act. Tonight, the evening was mine to claim, in whatever small way I could. I approached my father, my steps measured, my chest tight but steady. "Dad," I began, keeping my voice low yet firm, "I need to talk to you about what happened earlier." He glanced up, surprise flickering across his features before his practiced mask of calm returned. "Natalia, now isn't the time." "It is the time," I interrupted, holding his gaze. "Your behavior just now in front of everyone. It was unacceptable. I am not a child. I have my own life, my own decisions. I deserve to be treated with respect, even at this wedding." The murmur among guests quieted, some turning their heads to watch. A few faces softened in sympathy, others hardened with discomfort. My sister's laughter faltered, replaced by a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. I could almost hear her plodding in that quiet, calculating way she had perfected over years of competition. "You can't just slap me and expect everyone to forget," I continued, forcing my words to stay measured, avoiding anger that could make me seem reckless. "I've spent years being patient, staying quiet, accommodating, but I will not let that define my presence here or my role in this family." My father's jaw tightened. The dominance he relied upon was cracking, revealed in a twitch at the corner of his mouth, in the flicker of his eyes. Yet he tried to mask it with a dismissive wave. "Natalia, you're overreacting." "It was a moment. I know exactly what it was," I said, louder now, allowing my voice to carry across the patio. "A moment that humiliated me in front of people I respect and love. A moment that should never have happened. And yes, I will hold you accountable for it. Not publicly to shame, but publicly to stand as proof that I am not invisible, and I am not powerless." Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged quiet nods. I felt a subtle rush of validation, but I knew better than to linger in triumph. My sister's expression tightened. She had sensed the challenge and was already calculating a counter, the way she always did when control slipped through her fingers. I stepped back, letting the words hang in the air, observing the ripples of reaction. I could see the guests divide, some rooting quietly for me, others silently siding with my father or sister. The social tension was thick, almost tangible. I felt it, yes, but I also felt a strange exhilaration. For the first time, I wasn't hiding. For the first time, I was asserting my presence in a way that could not be ignored. I wandered along the edge of the patio, letting the night envelop me. The garden was quiet, save for the faint hum of conversations and the occasional clinking of glasses. I found a small bench beneath a flowering arbor and sat, taking a moment to regroup. In the stillness, my mind replayed the confrontation. I weighed what I had said against what I might have left unsaid, recognizing the thin line between assertion and escalation. I thought about my father's old patterns, how he manipulated through guilt and charm, how he demanded compliance without question. I thought about my sister's subtle manipulations, her casual cruelty that masqueraded as lighthearted teasing. I realized that my words tonight were not the end, but the beginning of something larger, a reclamation of my voice, a declaration that I could navigate my family's labyrinth of control without losing my moral center. A breeze rustled the petals above me, carrying with it the faint scent of the night garden, of jasmine and cooling grass. I let the sensation anchor me. I had planted a seed tonight, a small, defiant mark that could grow if nurtured carefully. There would be consequences, no doubt, backlash, whispers, perhaps more direct challenges, but I was ready. I had fortified my resolve, sharpened my awareness, and recognized that moral courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. From the corner of my eye, I noticed some of the guests who had initially smirked now exchanging uncertain glances. Even my father's circle seemed slightly frayed, the illusion of control slipping just enough for me to see its cracks. I allowed myself a small, private smile. This wasn't about defeating anyone in the moment, it was about planting the awareness that I would not be sidelined again. I stood, brushing petals from my sleeve, and moved toward the reception hall. Inside, the lights were softer, the music gentler, but the undercurrent of tension was unmistakable. My sister was still laughing, still performing perfection, but I sensed the unease that had begun to creep into her demeanor. I navigated the room deliberately, speaking quietly to a few supportive relatives, letting them know, without drama, that I was present and resolute. Every interaction was a test, every glance a measure of influence. I realized that tonight, my actions had created possibilities for confrontation, for reconciliation, or for further escalation. The direction would depend on choices made in the next hours, the next moments. I returned to the garden briefly, letting the air clear my thoughts once more. The stars were faint above the patio, the night settling into a contemplative quiet. I reminded myself, tonight, I had taken the first step. A seed had been planted, subtle but potent. Its growth would not be immediate, but it was inevitable. I walked back into the hall, my shoulders squared, my mind alert. The night was far from over, and I knew that the balance of power in my family was beginning to shift. I had drawn my line, and from this point forward, the rules would be mine to shape as well. Tonight, I had planted a seed of change. Little did I know how fiercely it would grow tomorrow. I returned to the lounge, my pulse still racing, knowing tonight's calm was only a temporary illusion. As something was about to erupt, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses felt fragile, like the surface of water disturbed by a sudden stone. I scanned the room, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the way my sister leaned toward our father, whispering as though they were conspiring in some secret language I had yet to decode. Guests nearby cast curious glances, some warm, some skeptical, all quietly aware that something had unsettled the night. To give myself a moment to breathe, I drifted toward the far corner of the lounge, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. Each step reminded me that I wasn't invisible here, not anymore. The seed I had planted in the garden was no longer hidden, it was out in the open, and the reaction it provoked would reveal alliances, rivalries, and the real character of everyone in that room. I felt a mixture of anticipation and cautious exhilaration, like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the fall could hurt, but also knowing I could soar if I jumped with confidence. My father, ever the strategist, was speaking quietly to Uncle James and a few of his old friends. He smiled in that measured way he always did when trying to maintain control, yet there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. I had struck a nerve. Across the room, my sister's laughter rang out, a rehearsed melody that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was enjoying the attention, but also calculating her next move. I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head, plotting a way to remind everyone of her superiority and my supposed failure. I took a slow sip of my champagne, feeling its gentle warmth spread through me. I needed to assess the battlefield before making the next move. Every whisper, every glance mattered. Even the seemingly mundane, an aunt adjusting her necklace, a cousin clearing their throat, was part of a network of observation that I could use. I was learning how to read the room as one might read a novel, understanding that the plot twists were not just in words but in body language, in micro-expressions. The first subtle provocation came quickly. Father leaned over to an older relative, speaking loudly enough for those nearby to hear. Natalia has always chosen her own path, though perhaps it's a path that leaves her single. There it was, the gentle, venomous jab that could undermine me socially without seeming overtly cruel. I caught the edge of a smirk on my sister's face, as if she had been waiting for this moment to laugh at me. My chest tightened, but I refused to flinch. I had prepared for this. I reminded myself, patience and precision mattered more than reaction. My sister's next move was nearly imperceptible. She let a sarcastic remark slip under the guise of playful commentary, directed at a group of mutual friends. Well, at least Natalia doesn't have to worry about coordinating a husband and in-laws tonight. A few titters followed, but I met her eyes steadily. Humor would be my shield and my weapon. I leaned slightly forward, smiling faintly, and said just loud enough for the nearest guest to hear. Actually, I think keeping some independence allows me to enjoy moments like these without extra complications. The shift was subtle, but I saw it. A fraction of doubt flash across her face. The tension in the room was tangible now, charged with the electricity of unspoken challenges. I approached my father, my movements deliberate, measured. The crowd didn't part, but I felt the weight of their attention. Standing before him, I spoke calmly yet firmly, ensuring that each word landed like a pebble in a still pond. "I want to address tonight directly," I began, my voice steady. "What happened in the garden was not acceptable. I am not a child, and I deserve respect from my family and from every guest here." I could see the flicker of discomfort cross his face, an expression I hadn't witnessed since I was a teenager. He tried to smile, to brush it off as dramatics, but the tension held firm. I pressed on, drawing on the knowledge that confidence often disarms arrogance. "I have contributed to this family, not just in appearances, but in care, effort, and loyalty, that cannot be dismissed by a hand or a word." Guests murmured softly, glancing between us. Some nodded discreetly, others leaned in, as though waiting for the inevitable next act. My sister's lips pressed into a thin line, her amusement replaced by calculation. She realized the upper hand she sought was slipping. As I returned to my corner, I reflected on the moral tightrope I was walking. How far could I push before decorum gave way to chaos? Was asserting my dignity worth the risk of a scandal that could tarnish my family's reputation? The answer, firmly planted in my heart, was yes. Integrity, for me, outweighed superficial peace. I would not allow fear or social convention to silence the truth of my existence. Scanning the room, I identified allies and potential adversaries. Old friends gave me subtle nods, a silent show of support that bolstered my confidence. Certain relatives exchanged uneasy looks, clearly unsure how to react. My sister's arrogance was cracking, revealing fissures that had always existed beneath her polished exterior. Father's attempts at control now seemed less effective. The room was subtly shifting, aligning in ways I could leverage. I caught sight of my cousin Mark, raising an eyebrow in quiet approval, and a gentle smile from Aunt Helen, whose eyes said more than words ever could. These small gestures reminded me that even in a room dominated by legacy and entitlement, respect and truth still found recognition. I had demonstrated that standing firm need not be loud to be powerful. As the night progressed, I observed without immediate reaction, letting the tension simmer. I didn't want to overplay my hand, but I wanted to make it unmistakably clear. I would not be pushed, humiliated, or silenced. The energy in the room shifted perceptibly, creating a delicate balance between threat and decorum. It was in this subtle exchange that I found my greatest strength, the ability to assert myself without descending into the chaos others seemed eager to provoke. Finally, I stepped back to the side of the lounge, resting my hands lightly on the back of a chair. I inhaled deeply, centering myself. The confrontation was far from over. The night was still young, and the emotional currents ran deep. I was ready for whatever came next, every nerve alert, every instinct sharpened. The room had transformed into a landscape of opportunity and risk, and I intended to navigate it with clarity and resolve. I knew the next move would test every ounce of courage I had left, and I wasn't going to flinch. The whispers had grown louder, but this time, I wasn't retreating. I had a voice, and I was going to use it. I stepped carefully through the clusters of guests near the buffet, my heels tapping softly on the polished wooden floor. The warm glow of the chandeliers caught the shimmer of the champagne flutes in everyone's hands, but my attention was fixed on the two people who had made this night unbearable. My father, standing with his chest puffed up like a general surveying his troops, and my sister, her lips pressed into a tight, forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. I paused at a side table, my fingers curling around my clutch as I watched them whisper to one another. There was no mistaking it. Their posture, the slight lean of my sister's head, the barely perceptible nod from my father, all of it screamed collusion. Guests glanced in my direction, some with curiosity, others with sympathy, their hushed tones like a fragile bridge between us and the social minefield my family had created. I inhaled slowly, reminding myself that composure was my shield and courage my sword. Moving closer, I could hear my father's voice, low but deliberate, taunting enough for the prying ears of a crowded room. "Natalia's been living in that tiny apartment downtown," he said, almost conversationally, though every word was dripping with judgment, "hardly the life one would expect for someone from our family." My chest tightened, the sting of embarrassment attempting to pierce through my careful calm. I felt the eyes of friends and distant cousins, measuring, calculating, waiting to see how I would respond. I stepped forward, voice even but firm. "Yes, I live in a modest place," I said, letting the words float over the murmurs. "It's mine. Every corner belongs to me. And I wouldn't trade my independence for the world." The words were simple, unadorned, but they carried a weight that my father hadn't anticipated. I watched his grin falter, and my sister's lips twitch as though she were suppressing a smirk. Some of the older relatives at the corner tables stiffened, eyebrows raised, signaling their silent judgment of my father's attempt to humiliate me. My sister's interjection came sharp, like a blade hidden in silk. "Oh, we all admire your, cozy lifestyle, Natalia," she said, voice tinged with mockery. "It must be enlightening, living so unencumbered." I let her words hang for a moment before replying calmly, "Yes, unencumbered by expectations or hypocrisy, unlike some of us in this room." A ripple of laughter, quiet but unmistakable, moved through the cluster of friends nearby, and I sensed the subtle shift. I wasn't alone, and the crowd was beginning to sense the disparity between public image and private truth. Then came the escalation I had been anticipating. My father's expression hardened, and he stepped closer, his voice rising. "You think independence is worth more than family, worth more than tradition? You're out of line." The words were sharp, intended to intimidate, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I met his gaze evenly. "Respect isn't a commodity, Dad. It isn't something you can demand just because the room is watching. And tonight, you've crossed a line." A collective hush fell over the nearest tables. The murmurs died, replaced by the tension of social confrontation. He scoffed, and for a moment, I saw something unfamiliar: hesitation. My sister, sensing the shift, tried to regain control. "Always the drama queen," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, meant for me, but loud enough for the table behind to hear. I smiled softly, letting my eyes meet those of the onlookers. "Drama is acknowledging truth when it's inconvenient," I said, letting the sentence land like a stone. "And tonight, truth isn't on your side." I could feel the weight of the room press against us, the social dynamics balancing on a knife's edge. Friends of the family subtly positioned themselves near me, offering supportive smiles, a quiet hand on my shoulder. Even some of my father's longtime colleagues shifted uncomfortably, their murmured questions about his behavior growing louder. It was a silent coalition forming, and I sensed the tide turning. Then came the ultimatum. "I will not have you disrespecting this family," he barked, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You will," I interrupted, voice steady, cutting through the looming chaos. "I will not allow threats, property, legacy, or any demand to compromise my life. None of it gives you the right to violate my boundaries. Tonight, in front of these witnesses, I assert that clearly." I watched as the shock spread across his face. The guests leaned in slightly, sensing that the private cruelty had been exposed publicly. For a few suspended moments, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then, my sister's facade wavered. Her smirk faltered, eyes darting toward a couple of cousins who had quietly raised eyebrows in my direction. She had underestimated the social currents swirling against her. I allowed myself a measured smile, careful not to gloat, but proud to see the scales beginning to shift. I took a small step back, surveying the scene. The buffet chatter had resumed, but it was subdued, a background hum to the charged energy in the center of the hall. Friends offered subtle nods of approval. Some distant relatives whispered to one another, and I could catch fragments. Did he really just... "She's holding her ground." Each snippet reinforced what I had already felt. Authority wasn't inherited automatically, and integrity carried a weight that arrogance couldn't match. I considered my next moves carefully. There would be more attempts to intimidate, more attempts to control. But I had seen their tactics, their reliance on appearances, their manipulation of expectation. I had also seen the room shifting in subtle allegiance. I knew that words, tempered with resolve and clarity, could reshape this moment in my favor. As I retreated to a quieter corner near the stage, the hum of music and conversation washing over me, I felt the solid footing of self-respect beneath my feet. I adjusted my posture, inhaling deeply, preparing myself for what was coming next. There would be no more passive endurance, no retreat behind polite smiles. Tonight demanded courage, strategy, and a refusal to yield. I could feel the energy of the room, the invisible currents pulling in my favor, and yet I knew that this was only the beginning. I caught my reflection in the polished surface of a nearby speaker, a brief, sharp reminder of who I was. Unbroken, alert, prepared. The tension crackling around the hall was a challenge, an invitation to assert my boundaries fully, to demonstrate that respect must be earned, not assumed. Every whispered conversation, every sidelong glance, every subtle act of solidarity from allies strengthened my resolve. I straightened, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Tonight's confrontation was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the tide of power subtly shifting toward me. And I knew, in that electric, suspended moment, that the next move would demand everything I had, my wit, my courage, and my unyielding sense of self. Link to next chapter. I could see the cracks forming in their armor, but I also knew tonight wasn't over. This was just the beginning. I realized that words alone wouldn't silence the chaos. They needed proof that I wouldn't be pushed aside. Standing there near the center of the reception hall, I could feel the weight of every eye, every whisper brushing against my skin. My father lounged in his chair like a general who thought he'd already won the battle, while my sister hovered nervously, unsure whether to scold or retreat. I clenched my fists, feeling the pulse of determination rising through me. Tonight, there was no room for retreat. I shifted my gaze across the hall, noting who might witness the next move, friends who had been quietly supportive, older relatives with knowing eyes, even a few colleagues who had flown in just for the wedding. All of them could testify that I wasn't the reckless one here. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself, courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was moving forward in spite of it. I stepped toward the table where my father had been trying to monopolize the discussion about my apartment, the very property I had worked for and maintained with my own efforts. He noticed me moving and smirked, clearly expecting me to hesitate. But the smirk faltered the moment I straightened my shoulders and spoke, loud enough for half the hall to hear. Let's be clear, my apartment is mine. Every penny, every decision is my responsibility, and no one, not even my father, has the right to make claims over it. A murmur spread through the guests, a mix of shock and approval. My sister tried to interject, her voice dripping with the entitlement I'd known all my life. Natalia, you're overreacting. This is ridiculous. I turned to her, eyes steady. Overreacting? Maybe. But letting someone belittle your independence is ridiculous. And that stops tonight. The sharpness in my tone left little room for her mockery to survive. My father laughed, a harsh, empty sound meant to dismiss me. So dramatic, he said, leaning back. You really think everyone is going to take your side? The irony in his tone, suggesting I was overstepping, only fueled my resolve. You'll see, I replied evenly, letting the challenge hang in the air. The room knows the truth, and truth has a way of speaking louder than any insult. He rose from his chair, anger flashing in his eyes now. You're trying to embarrass me in front of our family, he barked. Guests instinctively leaned in, sensing the social breach, as though we were all actors in a tense drama unfolding on the polished wooden floor. I didn't flinch. Embarrass you? I countered, stepping closer, keeping my voice calm but firm. I'm not embarrassing anyone. I'm simply refusing to be treated as less than I am. You've crossed the line, repeatedly. The hall seemed to contract around us, the air thick with anticipation. Relatives whispered among themselves, some nodding in quiet agreement. A few of my older cousins, known for their principled voices, edged closer and murmured affirmations. She's right. About time someone said it. Their subtle support gave me a silent boost, a reminder that I wasn't alone in standing for what was right. I held up my apartment keys, small but symbolic. This, I said, letting the jingle punctuate my words, is mine. My independence, my space, my life. I earned it. I will not let it be questioned or commandeered. My father's confident posture wavered for a fraction of a second, the first crack in his facade all evening. My sister's lips pressed together, her earlier amusement now replaced by a twitch of uncertainty. Listen, Natalia, he snapped, attempting to regain control. You don't know what you're saying. I shook my head, each word deliberate. I know exactly what I'm saying. I also know the people here can see how you've been trying to manipulate and belittle me, and I will not allow it to continue. The guests stirred, some exchanging surprised glances. The social weight of his aggression was beginning to tip against him. I continued, letting my tone remain poised, but layering it with sharp clarity. Trying to shame me doesn't make you right. It only shows how far you're willing to go to protect your ego. And tonight, that ego is exposed for everyone to see. The hall fell into a tense silence. Even the band had paused their music. Every eye was fixed on us, the family fractures laid bare. My father, flushed with anger, attempted a personal barb. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? He said, voice trembling slightly. Everyone's going to see you as insufferable. I smiled faintly, the gesture calm yet cutting. If standing up for myself is insufferable, then so be it. But trying to diminish me won't go unnoticed. And social norms, the very ones you like to flaunt, expect decency. Remember that. The crowd shifted, subtle nods of approval rippling quietly among the onlookers. Observing the subtle gestures of support around me, I sensed a strategic advantage. My closest friends, leaning in from the periphery, offered validating remarks. She's handled this beautifully, one whispered. You can't argue with that. I allowed these small interventions to strengthen my position, weaving them into the narrative of fairness and justice. Every step I took, every word I spoke, reinforced the idea that my actions were grounded not in revenge, but in principle. I noticed my father's face tightening, his aggressive bravado faltering under the collective scrutiny. My sister, too, was losing her footing, her earlier confidence giving way to anxiety. I maintained my composure, aware that power in these moments came not from shouting, but from clarity and unshakable moral authority. I framed my actions carefully, appealing to shared social expectations, honesty, respect, fairness. This isn't about defiance for the sake of it, I added, letting my voice carry across the hall. It's about ensuring that respect, earned respect, is recognized. It's about reminding everyone here that dignity is not a privilege granted. It's a right, and it applies to all of us, equally. The subtle laughter of my allies at the edges of the crowd, small nods from the older relatives, and the shift in energy among the guests signaled a social realignment. I had regained the moral high ground. Even as I stood there, heart still racing from the confrontation, I understood that tonight was far from over. My father's defeat was not complete. His temperament and stubbornness were yet to be fully tested, but I had established a foothold, drawn a line in the sand, and claimed a moment of decisive agency. Guests began to murmur again, a cautious blend of admiration and disbelief. My sister's shoulders slumped slightly, her words now faltering whenever she tried to interject. And though the night was still young, I could feel the tension coiling like a storm ready to break. Every glance, every gesture was now a prelude to what would come. Tonight, I had drawn my line in the sand, but I could feel the storm building, and I knew the reckoning was yet to come. The whispers in the hall grew louder, and I could feel every eye on us. I knew the moment of reckoning had finally come. I took a deep breath, letting the energy of the crowd wash over me. Every subtle glance, every half smile or frown became part of the battlefield. I was no longer just a daughter in the room. I was a force demanding recognition, demanding justice. I could sense my father tightening his jaw, his usual smirk faltering under the weight of attention. I shifted my stance slightly, planting my feet firmly on the polished wooden floor, my hands resting lightly at my sides. My gaze swept over the guests, family, friends, colleagues of my sister, and I noted their expressions. Some were shocked, some curious, and a few even slightly amused at the unfolding drama. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about truth, fairness, and finally holding my family accountable for the long-standing imbalance. "You've had your say," I began, my voice steady but loud enough to reach the nearest tables. "And now it's my turn." The room quieted, the chatter fading like a tide retreating. My father's eyes narrowed, clearly expecting the usual submission, the usual retreat. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I took a step forward, closing the small gap between us. "I worked hard for everything I have. Every cent I contributed to this wedding came from me. Not from empty promises, not from your idea of generosity. I am not a child who can be dismissed with a hand wave or a lecture. I am your daughter, and I deserve respect, just like anyone else here." A few guests nodded subtly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to tip the balance. The moral weight of the room was shifting, and my father could feel it. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off before he could launch into his familiar barrage of guilt and blame. "My independence, my work, my life, they are mine," I said, lifting my voice slightly. "And I will not allow them to be undermined in front of all these people. Not tonight, not ever." My sister stepped forward, a hand raised as if to interject, her voice trembling slightly. "Natalia, please." I turned my gaze on her, calm but unyielding. "No. Tonight, I speak for myself. Everyone here can see what's fair and what isn't. I won't let anyone, not even family, rewrite the story to make me the villain." A few older relatives, the ones who had quietly observed from the back, cleared their throats and nodded in affirmation. A whisper of support rose around me, gentle but growing, like the first threads of a storm. Their subtle cues were enough to fortify me, and I felt a surge of courage that I hadn't realized I'd been holding back until now. Father's posture stiffened, his fists clenching at his sides. "You think you can stand here and lecture me in front of everyone?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying his usual composure. "I don't think, I know," I shot back, my voice calm but precise, each word measured to land with authority. "You've spent decades trying to control every decision, every opinion, every ounce of who I am. But not anymore. You will not dictate how I am treated. Not at this table, not on this night, not ever." The room seemed to hold its collective breath. I could feel the tension radiating off my father like heat from a fire. He took a threatening step toward me, a gesture meant to intimidate, and I stayed my ground, meeting his movement with a steady gaze, unflinching. The guests shifted, sensing the potential for confrontation. A couple of uncles subtly moved closer to me, placing themselves as silent witnesses, their presence a quiet reinforcement of my stance. "I will not be bullied. I will not be shamed into silence," I continued, my voice rising slightly, resonant with conviction. "This wedding was meant to celebrate love, unity, and family. And yet here you are, trying to impose fear instead of pride. I refuse to allow that to happen. Everyone here knows who has worked tirelessly, who has given their all, and who has been overlooked." A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. My father's glare swept across the guests, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the frustration and fear that comes when authority is publicly questioned. His mouth opened, then closed. His usual threats, veiled or direct, fell flat against the weight of truth, the power of witness, and my unshakable composure. I glanced at my sister again. She was frozen, realizing perhaps for the first time that entitlement and pretense could not protect her from the light of accountability. I didn't attack her. I simply exposed the pattern. "And you," I said, nodding subtly toward her, "benefit from that pattern. But tonight, the scales are tipping. It's time we all see what fairness looks like." An aunt near the buffet quietly remarked, "She's right. All of this was her work." Others whispered similar sentiments, some surprised to speak out, others emboldened by my courage. The hall began to tilt, shifting social gravity from my father's dominance to my clear, rational stand. For the first time that evening, I saw the cracks widen. My father's shoulders slumped slightly. His next words, intended to wound, didn't land as expected. He tried a personal jab, a low blow about my independence and choices, but the witnesses I had gathered, the moral high ground I maintained, rendered it powerless. "I've heard enough," I said firmly, You've had your say, and I've had mine, and I will not be diminished here or anywhere else. My voice was a declaration, a line drawn not in anger, but in truth. Guests nodded, some clapping lightly, not out of mockery, but in acknowledgement of the dignity I carried. The tension didn't dissolve entirely. It simmered like a kettle just off the boil. But I had achieved what I came for: public recognition, moral victory, and a clear signal that the days of silent submission were over. My father, visibly shaken and unaccustomed to losing face in front of so many, stepped back, the aggressive energy leaving his posture. My sister, chastened and caught in the reflection of her own behavior, retreated quietly. I exhaled, letting my shoulders relax, the adrenaline still thrumming in my veins. My allies smiled subtly, their support unwavering but discreet. I had stood my ground, maintained my composure, and forced accountability without stooping to anger or physical confrontation. The room began to return to celebration, yet the echo of confrontation lingered. Conversations were hushed, eyes still flicked toward us, and the weight of the evening had shifted irreversibly. I felt a mixture of triumph and lingering pain, the relief of standing tall, tempered by the knowledge that family bonds carry scars that don't heal overnight. I turned toward the dance floor, letting the music and laughter reclaim the space, but my mind remained alert. The battle in the hall was over, yet I knew the journey toward real peace and the reshaping of family conscience was only beginning. The night had been won, but the war for integrity, respect, and closure stretched beyond the reception lights. I stepped back, a soft smile playing on my lips, aware that the crowd had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had witnessed a transformation. And as I glanced around the hall, I understood that tonight, a line had been drawn not just in sand, but in hearts. I had won the battle in the hall, but the war for my peace and family's conscience wasn't over yet. Tomorrow, everything would change. The night had settled into a strange, uneasy quiet after the chaos in the reception hall. I sat at the edge of the dance floor, my hands still trembling slightly, the hum of the remaining guests' conversations washing over me like distant waves. My mind replayed every moment, the way Father's hand had struck me, the sudden hush, the look of shock on every face. I knew that tonight I had to close the chapter, not just for myself, but to show everyone that dignity and justice mattered more than fear. The thought of tomorrow's confrontation steeled me in a way I hadn't felt before. I stepped outside onto the balcony for a moment, letting the cool night air touch my face. The city lights flickered below, a silent audience to my turmoil. I leaned against the railing, recalling the whispered support from a few guests who had silently nodded at me during the scene. I realized I wasn't alone in knowing what was right. That acknowledgement gave me a flicker of calm amidst the adrenaline still surging in my veins. I knew Father would not let this rest easily, but I had something far more powerful than anger, clarity, and the quiet conviction that the truth would outshine his manipulations. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the room as if urging me to rise, to face what had been left unresolved. I dressed quickly, choosing an outfit that felt purposeful, not flashy, but assertive. The mirror reflected a woman determined, scarred yet unbowed. I carried with me a list of what I had endured, documented moments that could no longer be twisted by anyone. As I left the hotel, I felt the weight of the upcoming confrontation settle on my shoulders, but it wasn't oppressive, it was grounding. Each step toward my father's home felt like a step toward reclaiming not just my dignity, but my life. Father was already there when I arrived, pacing the living room like a caged lion. He looked up when I entered, his expression a mixture of irritation and calculation. "Natalia," he said, attempting a casual tone that rang hollow to my ears. "We need to talk about last night." "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "We do. And we're going to be honest this time. No more excuses." I could feel the eyes of a few witnesses, family friends who had quietly gathered on us, giving me the unspoken support I needed. Father's lips tightened. He tried to launch into a familiar tactic, minimizing his actions, framing me as overreacting. But I interrupted with calm precision, recounting the events exactly as they had happened, citing witnesses and pointing out the hypocrisy and entitlement he had displayed. You always make everything about yourself, he spat. Even your sister's wedding? I shook my head, forcing a controlled breath through the anger that threatened to rise. No, father. I made everything about her happiness, yet you chose to make it about your control. That's the difference. My words hung in the air, firm and unyielding. I glanced at my sister, who had hovered nervously nearby, trying to mediate or maybe pick a side. And you, I added, turning my gaze to her, you've had every privilege handed to you without consequence. It's time someone saw the truth. Her face flushed, a mix of guilt and defiance, and she stepped back slightly. Natalia, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, feeling a strange surge of empathy beneath the anger. I understand that you've been shielded and I've been blamed. I understand that you've never had to face what it's like to build your own life and fight for fairness, and I won't let that continue. Father's fists clenched at his sides. The tension was palpable, thick enough to taste. He stepped forward, a warning in his motion, and I didn't flinch. I met his gaze squarely, standing taller than I knew I could. The room held its breath, the witness's eyes flitting between us. Then I spoke, not with anger, but with unwavering authority. If you step closer, you'll do more than embarrass yourself. You'll expose the truth of who you really are. For a moment, it seemed like he might ignore me, but then he stopped, his dominance finally faltering under the weight of truth and the silent support surrounding him. The room, previously a stage for his authority, now recognized my composure as the real force commanding attention. It was a social and moral victory, and I felt it in my bones, the quiet thrill of being seen for the strength I had cultivated. I took the next step, asserting what had been denied for so long. This wedding, the apartment, my finances, everything I've worked for belongs to me, and I will no longer allow it to be undermined. I could see the shift in the room. Allies nodded, some uttering quiet affirmations. Even those who had been neutral found themselves confronting the injustice before them. Father's face drained of color, realizing that manipulation had its limits when confronted with clarity and collective acknowledgement. My sister's lips quivered, and she finally met my eyes, recognition dawning that her behavior had consequences, that her entitlement was no longer invisible. She looked at father, at me, and then away, perhaps beginning the slow journey of understanding her own role in the harm done. Later, as I stepped back, letting the room settle, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. The confrontation had ended, yet I felt the lingering pulse of the night's tension. I reflected on the importance of self-respect, independence, and standing firm against injustice. Some relationships may never fully mend, I admitted to myself, but the knowledge that I had acted with integrity and courage gave me a profound sense of empowerment. Sitting quietly, I let my mind drift toward the future. I envisioned moments of tentative reconciliation, the possibility of dialogue grounded in honesty rather than fear. I knew that some scars would remain, but I had won something more enduring: control over my life, a clear conscience, and the respect of those around me. As the afternoon light softened, I lingered in that space, absorbing the quiet dignity of having stood my ground. The echoes of the past would always whisper, but I was no longer afraid to meet them. Tomorrow, the family might still struggle with truths long ignored, but tonight I had claimed victory, not with vengeance, but with the quiet force of justice. I had won the fight, yet the echo of the wounds lingered. I wasn't just closing a chapter, I was stepping into a new life, aware that some scars tell the most important stories. Even though the fight had ended, I felt the weight of the aftermath settling like a quiet fog in my apartment. The echo of that hall, the gasps, the whispers, they weren't gone, and neither were the feelings they left behind. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea, letting the warmth seep into my hands, grounding me. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to sit still and breathe without the edge of confrontation pressing down. I knew now that some lessons aren't about winning. They're about understanding, standing firm, and claiming the dignity you've earned. The living room, usually a place of comfort, felt strangely reflective tonight. I sank into the armchair near the window, the city lights casting a soft glow across the hardwood floors. My phone vibrated once, another congratulatory message from a distant cousin, but I ignored it, choosing silence instead. I wanted to think, not respond, to trace back every step of the past week. The slap, the sneers, the disbelief, and finally, the moment I stood tall against them. Sitting there, I realized I'd learned more about myself than I had ever expected. It wasn't just about holding my ground in front of my father or exposing my sister's false bravado. It was about recognizing the quiet strength that had carried me here. That strength had been there all along, hiding behind fear and doubt, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The next morning, I rose with the sun spilling through the blinds, brushing my hair back as I stared at my reflection. My apartment felt different now, lighter, almost as if it recognized my victory. Every corner of this space had been my retreat, my sanctuary, and now it was a symbol of autonomy. I walked to the kitchen, brewed coffee, and leaned against the counter, letting the aroma fill the room. A part of me expected the phone to ring with news from my father or sister, some attempt to twist the narrative, but it remained silent. That silence felt like an ally. I remembered the conversation I had the evening before with Mrs. Gardner, a guest who had stayed behind to offer support. She had said, "Natalia, you remind us that integrity isn't just a word, it's a practice. What you did, you reminded everyone that respect can't be demanded, it has to be earned." Her words lingered, comforting and validating. I realized that beyond family, the social fabric of those around me had recognized the truth. That acknowledgement carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. There were practical matters too, papers to sign, legal affirmations to finalize my apartment, and bank appointments to ensure my finances were fully under my control. Sitting at my desk, the stack of documents spread before me, I felt a sense of power I hadn't known I could claim. Each signature, each initial, was a mark of independence. I wasn't just reclaiming property or money, I was reclaiming my life. My father's manipulation no longer had a foothold. My sister's defensiveness, which had seemed so sharp and unassailable, now felt like an echo of insecurity that I could observe without fear or guilt. A phone call from my brother punctuated the afternoon. "Natalia, I just wanted to say I'm proud of you," he said quietly, voice weighted with emotion. "I know it wasn't easy, and I know it changed a lot, but you handled it with a dignity that made me rethink my own choices." I smiled softly, grateful for his honesty, and reminded myself that rebuilding trust, even selectively, was part of this journey. Relationships were complicated, messy, and sometimes fragile, but I could choose which threads to mend and which to let remain distant. By evening, the city had dimmed, and the apartment glowed with soft lamplight. I moved to the balcony, the cool air brushing my face, and thought about what had truly shifted. The humiliation, the anger, the confrontation, they were memories now, and I could carry them without allowing them to dictate my life. I remembered the faces at the wedding, some shocked, some silently supportive, and some resentful. It struck me that truth has a way of standing tall on its own, even amidst lies and deceit. My father's attempts at control had faltered not because I forced him, but because I refused to bend to injustice. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, tracing each emotion, each moment of clarity. "Standing up for myself doesn't make me cruel," I wrote. "It makes me human. It makes me aware of my boundaries and my worth." The act of writing solidified the understanding that personal integrity matters more than appearances, more than temporary peace gained by submission. Some family bonds may never fully repair, and some conversations will remain unfinished. But knowing my own strength, holding my dignity intact, was an achievement that no slap, no humiliation, no betrayal could ever erase. The next few days passed in quiet rhythms: grocery trips, calls with a trusted friend, a walk in the park where the leaves whispered change. It all reminded me that life was both ordinary and extraordinary. My apartment became a haven of reflection, a space where I could remember the lessons without reliving the pain. And yet, even in solitude, I felt the gentle hum of possibility. I wasn't running from the past, I was learning from it. Late one evening, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror as I adjusted a picture frame. My eyes, tired but alert, reflected a subtle pride. I thought about the future, conversations that needed careful handling, the possibility of rebuilding connections, the pursuit of personal goals I had set aside. I understood that standing up for justice isn't a one-time act, it's a lifelong practice. And I was ready to continue, fully aware of the responsibility that comes with power, compassion, and self-respect. I sank into my chair by the window once more, gazing at the lights of the city and the quiet hum of distant traffic. Some wounds remained, yes, but they were no longer chains. They were markers of growth. I sipped my tea and felt a calm resolve settle over me. The fight had taught me that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to hold your ground, to insist on fairness, and to protect your dignity. I was still standing. I was still whole. And for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to step forward, not with anger, but with clarity, strength, and hope. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my voice. Some wounds remained, but they were now badges of courage, and I was ready to face whatever came next, stronger than ever. Before we wrap up, this story reminds us that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about claiming your dignity, protecting your boundaries, and knowing your worth even when family betrays you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to confront someone close to you to defend yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss the next story where courage and justice collide.